Hello, everyone. Happy to see you in the room. Come and join. We will start soon the session Securing and Building Trust for this 2020 LIBER conference. Okay. For this session, first, welcome. I will give you a small set of rules to follow when information. Please note that this session is recorded. So of course, we will share all slides and recording with you afterwards. If you have any questions for the speakers, please use the chat box on the left. That will be easier so that anyone can see your questions, answer them. And if your question has no answer in the chat, do not worry. We will take it into account for the Q&A session at the end of this panel. Any technical issues arise, please check your settings. You can do it, or you can disconnect, reconnect. If there is a big problem, please try to close the tab and start again. So if everyone is ready, I will ask the panel please to join me online and we can start the session. So today we will have several presentations. We are all here. We will start with Arjen Schalken from the Netherlands, who will tackle trust as a key element in implementing green open access based on Dutch copyright law. Then we will hear Jos Westerbeke and Pieter Gietz, who will talk about trusting the library to protect your identity. And we will end with Claire Gillian-Knowles and William Nixon, and they will talk about building trust in institutional repositories in UK research libraries. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will start with one of the winners of the OCLC Award this year, Arjen Schalken. Please, Arjen, the floor is yours. We will disappear, and the mic is over to you.
Thank you, Cecile. First of all, great to give a presentation to you all and to tell you some more about the Dutch initiative, and hopefully you have some takeaways for your own country and go also forward. So let's start my presentation. It's about the Dutch Green Open Access pilot that we named You Share, We Take Care. You Share, that is the researchers, and We Take Care, that's about us, the librarians. So to make sure that we take all, we do the hard work, just say to us, share it. Something about me, I'm the national project manager of the pilot, first of all, in 2019. And during that period, I was also deputy director of the library of the Free University in Amsterdam. And since January this year, I'm focusing on the national level. I'm program manager of Ecobasis, and Ecobasis is all about improving the impact of the consortium deals, contract management. And I'm still the project manager of the national You Share, We Take Care project. So you see some contact info. If you have some questions about my work, please let me know and contact me. Well, if you look at the Dutch goal to go to 100% open access in 2020, that was a goal that was established in 2015, and you look at the trend, then you see that we did a lot of effort in the read and publish deals, and that increased open access. You see a lot of publisher activities and funder activities, what stimulated the goal open access. And but you see that green open access, repository open access stays behind. So I'm not addressing at this moment preprints or gratis open access from publishers. I'm focusing on these three elements because they are important for the Dutch open access reports. But the question is, why does repository open access stays behind? And we already learned for ourselves that when going to that 100% open access, we need to optimize all the different strategies. We can't just say, well, we're going for the read and publish part. So I'm focusing now on that part of the green open access, repository open access. So what are some of the hurdles regarding repository open access? Well, first, if you look at Sherpa Romeo, this is a quote from Elsevier, but I think it's related to almost all the publishers. What you see is that there are every journal of many journals have their own policies, and it takes a lot of effort for the researchers. Some of the policies are funder related, so ergo, it's very complex. There's another hurdle, and that is, so I'm moving too fast. Yeah, that is another hurdle. This is from a report from 2017, a UK report, what also was saying that green OA is much too complex, and it's even becoming more complex. So you see that the amount of journals with zero embargo has fallen. You see that the amount of journals that set the embargo on more than 12 months has increased. So you see that with green open access, publishers are taking the lead, and at the same time don't make it more easy. And of course, this is before Plan S, so hopefully there you see that some of the guidelines from Plan S have impact on policy rules, but still, in this situation, it still occurs. It's not easy being green. So then, of course, it's also the question, what do researchers experience? And then you see, if you talk with researchers, they often say, well, I don't have time to upload my paper. I mean, when they've written their paper, they're already busy with the next project. So they're not that interested in another administrative task. Often, and that is especially for co-authors, they don't have the correct version. So the last version of the AAM, the author accepted manuscript, they don't have. So even if they want to share it, they don't have it. The uploading process is complex. How does the repository work? And of course, as librarians, we think it's a very easy system, especially when you work with it every day. But as an author, you don't work with it every day. How do you do it? I forgot, of course, sometimes even if you think, well, I'm going to do it and maybe I have some embargo time, I set it in my agenda, etc., but you forget. And also you see in some of the research communities, the author accepted manuscript is perfectly fine, and others say, well, no, we don't work that way. We only share the version of record. So that's the final version that is published. So a lot of reasons why not to publish or to share, and some are maybe more legit than others, but still, that's the way it goes. And then there is, I think in most countries and also in the Netherlands, there is an open access, a green open access policy on national level. In the Netherlands, that is very vaguely formulated. So this is a copy, and for example, I think if you look at the Belgium Copyright Act, that says exactly about 50% of the funding, and something about the embargo time. But in the Netherlands, it's about short work, wholly or partly Dutch funded. It can be made available after reasonable time. So how to cope with this, especially as a researcher? How many researchers see this and say, well, this is a call for action for me? I don't think many of them did so. And at the same time, also in 2015, when it was written, all libraries were still busy redeveloping the repository, also looking at read and publish deals. So this wasn't really used. But then the question is, how can you make this a usable amendment? And this is the essence of my presentation. And I give you 10 steps of how we did it. So the first step was that as libraries, we we took the initiative. So nobody was really looking at the amendment, and we said, well, let's take the responsibility and at least try to understand what the amendment meant or could meant. So then you see that the first decision we made was not to ask every university to have an internal discussion about the interpretation, but we did it on a high, on national level. And I think that is very important. We see in every case where we ask universities about a legal interpretation of some kind of a case, that every legal expert has his own definition. So what we here did was ask a very well-known expert, Professor Hugols, about his interpretation and also his advice on how to implement it. And based on his advice, we saw the potential of this amendment, and also especially when it came to the open access for co-authors, open access for book chapters, and I will go in some more detail later on. But we saw the advantages of this, the potential at least of this amendment, and decided that we should position it at strategic level of the universities. So there wasn't a direct demand from the universities to do something with it, but we positioned it. And one of the questions in that process, especially from publishers, was, why didn't you ask us for feedback? And I think there is also the question of taking initiative is, with whom do you discuss this? At that moment, in the initial phase, the strategy phase, we decided that as a library, it was our duty to support the researcher and not teaming up with the publisher or other stakeholders. It's not about competition or friends or enemies. It's about knowing the role you have, and in that role, it's our colleagues, the researchers we want to help, and it's not about cooperating with other third parties like publishers to enable the amendment. So the initiative was taken by the libraries. A second question was, of course, how can we make the amendment translated in a set of rules, guidelines that are powerful and as simple as possible? Because one of the challenges was, of course, that we made something that was maybe legally very fine-tuned, but practically unusable. And there, I think the fact that the amendment was vague, that looked like something that was hindering us. We made it, I think, to a benefit. We defined it based on the space we created, and so it was. We established that we could use the version of record, especially when there was some time of exclusiveness, exclusivity with the publishers for a 6 months embargo period. For all of the research areas, it's about the first publication date, so not about the journal publication date, but first online. Short academic work is not only about articles, but also about conference papers and chapters in edited versions of edited collections, so no monographs, but still. And it applies if you contribute. So a co-author also is one of the contributors. His or her name is part of the paper, and it's about the fact that it's funded for an author who works in the Netherlands for a Dutch university, and it doesn't matter if it's published in a Dutch journal or in an international journal. So this is a relatively simple set of rules with a huge impact. I think that's very important for further on to position it. So the third step was to position it on a strategic level. We now had established that we could have a working amendment with enough added value for the 100% open access strategy. So we positioned it, and the libraries committed to it, and we discussed it with the universities. And I think what was very important was also that the universities wanted to cooperate, even when legal issues might occur. So to get that more in a little bit more detail, if somewhere a publisher sues an author or a university, then the universities step in and collaborate, and especially for the smaller universities, this was very important. Then you see that on the national level, we positioned it to not only the universities, but even on a higher level to the National Platform of Open Science, and also to the government. And the universities and the government committed to it in a sector agreement, and that also gave the project a formal status. So very important. After that, so after positioning it on strategic level, we started more and more to organize ourselves. First on the national level, there was a national project team was formed, and I became the project manager. And by the way, there was no budget at all, but my university thought it was so important that they gave me 1 day a week to do this in kind. And also for the other project members, it was all in kind. Very important, I think, make the first steps, and then talk about money afterwards. And that national project team also started to make toolkits, so concept licenses, for example, PR material, and also organized an infrastructure for the national teams, for the local teams, for the local project managers to do their work, and also acknowledge that it was very important to evaluate what all the universities were doing and their experiences, and then come back at a higher level, on national level, with an evaluation. I think a big advantage is here that the Netherlands is, I think, a relatively well-organized country. Also the libraries, so there were already infrastructures in place, and I think we made optimal use of it. Step 5 was, I think, the very important one, is to get stakeholders in the solution modus. So of course libraries are very busy, but they had to see it as an added service on the strategic level. And the question is not, can a project manager or a repository manager or an OA expert find some time, but can we give him or her the time he or she needs to do this project? So I had short lines with the library directors to facilitate them. The legal officers, very important to get them in the solution modus. So not in a way that they say, well, interesting, there's an amendment, let's see what we think about it. But okay, on a strategic level, there is a go. It's about how can we implement it? What are the guidelines for our university? So it's not about the why, but it's about the how. And I think that's always very interesting to talk with legal experts. It's more about keep it on the how and not on the why side. And of course, for different board members and research directors, that they became champions and supported actively. So let's do it. And then when you know that everybody's in action modus, then it's important that on a local level, so the institutes level, things are getting organized, and that not everybody has to invent the wheel for themselves, but there is some kind of a template, for example, for a project plan. So we wrote that on a national level. We had templates for the licenses, we had templates for communication. And of course, you see that on a local level, there are some changes are made. For example, in the licenses, some universities said, well, we want to define ownership slightly different. That's no problem. But we all checked all the changes that were made, but it were all fine. But if some university would say, well, we translate the amendment differently, it's not 6 months embargo, but 12 months, that was a no-go. So knowing where to differ and where to stay firm and do the same thing was very important. The researcher and the university signed a license. The library downloads the version of records. It is uploaded in the repository, and after 6 months, it's then made available. And if needed, legal support is done. So the project was in place, and I think a very important step was then show commitment and leadership. The rector magnificus of every university participated, so that was it was great, and it was even not something I asked for. But that was something they offered themselves. Very happy with it. So these are some screen dumps of tweets about it, of the fact that every Rector Magnificus was signing and also sharing his or her work in the repository through this amendment. And also many other senior researchers were joining in. So very, very important. And I think also that commitment and leadership was shown with the agreement, especially asked for by the smaller publishers, the smaller universities, to team up when a publisher wants to sue. I think that is also hardly unheard of. Also in the Netherlands, that is done, but it's very good, and that is still happening right now. If there is a sue, if there is a legal issue, then we team up together. Step 9 is the hard work, the communication, the collaboration, the explaining. Open access experts of libraries talked a lot with researchers. I got a lot of positive feedback also from library experts that say, well, I now have an extra option for researchers to offer, make use of the amendment, give us the right to share your work, and we'll do it. The library management who was talking with the senior management, project managers who were talking with each other. And also we were talking with publishers, especially with the Dutch Media Federation, about why do we do it. They were very afraid of the fact that we now change from the read and publish deals to green open. We said, no, that's not the case. We want to have open access as part of the publication, the whole open science movement, and not something that is done at the end. But we see it as a safety net and as an option where gold open access is not possible. So we try to explain why we did it. Of course, the step after that is also to learn and anticipate. We saw that most universities started and had a broad approach. So the more researchers participated in the pilot, the better. The more publishers, the better. But some said, well, no, we target on a research group, or we target on a specific publisher that is important for us. And that is fine. I mean, it was sometimes a bit of risk management. Sometimes it was more about availability of staff. I think in a pilot, it's the most important thing is to make steps to improve and to learn. So we did that, and of course, evaluation of the pilot was also very important. The pilot was not something that we say, well, we're going to start and anyhow we're going to continue. No, we did the proper evaluation and then made the decision. So the results of the pilot from 2019, it was a pilot of 7 months. All universities participated. Very happy with that. 600 researchers signed it. 200 publications were shared. Most of them articles, but also some book chapters. So you see some universities especially found that book chapter of edited collections very useful, and there were no legal incidents. And there we see that, yeah, well, we took initiative, and publishers have an opinion about it, but having an opinion about it is not the same as then suing all the universities. I mean, I think it's better to get ahead, to have the momentum and see how others react to you than what we did before with Green Open Access, that the publishers set the standard and that researchers had to react to that standard. So setting our own standards, I think, is very important. Some of the conclusions, I think researchers overall were very positive of the extra open access possibilities, also over the service from libraries. The fact that there is no more, no, sorry, we can't help you with open access. I mean, of course, we look at the deals we have, other ways of publishing open access, but if that's not possible, then we always have Taverne, the green open access within 6 months, your published version, and I think that's very important. You see that sometimes researchers fear some peer pressure. What do my, let's say, foreign colleagues say when I'm just a co-author and share it by the Dutch amendment? So I hope that if they see that more researchers are doing it, and maybe also in other countries, then that peer pressure diminishes. Some of the institutes who had really took it to the next level in the pilot saw an increase of open access with around 6%. In total, that is, if you look at the total amount of open access, then 10%. And if you look at the amount of missed open access, 15%. So let's say if you miss 40% of all your articles, then that's the total amount, maximum amount of open access, green open access you can achieve. And then you have 15% of that was already done in the pilot. So that made also clear that the potential of the pilot is high. At the same time, it's not Plan S compliant. So that was all also obvious, and we showed that transparently that is an issue. And this is not the only green route we have. And I'm also very much in contact with Plan S and NWO funders. So publishers are critical about their business and the business model, but if they say, well, prove that it has impact on your business model, they don't have actual figures. Well, so that is mentioned in the evaluation, but we don't take action based on that. We advise to scale up also on national level. And the main issue is the workflow. I think it can be done manually. It's even beneficial manually, but with a limited workforce, a limited amount of hours you have, every automation you can make is important. So this was the main issue, is improve the workflow. Step 10, the last step, is that universities agrees on the conclusions of the pilot. There was a positive advice. We asked advice on changing from opt-in to opt-out. So it was opt-in. A researcher has to express that they want to join, and we asked Professor Hugoff, the same as expert as in the beginning, can we maybe change that to an opt-out? And that is possible when part of a university policy. So now the first universities are looking into making a local policy for an opt-out. And if that's the case, well, then it's going to speed up even more rapidly. So I'm very looking forward to that. And I hope that by the end of this year, several universities have an opt-out policy. We made some guidelines of how to implement it. Also very important, after first universities, now also the university medical centers are starting to join, and they are also responsible for a huge amount of research output. We also, after the pilot, the next 2 years, the sharing of the risk, legal risk will be shared. So that's very important. And when we started with in-kind work, now the government finances the national project team. So that is also great. Finally, the LIBER conference is about trust. What has this to do with trust? Well, first of all, I think the libraries need to trust from the university management and the government to start what we started. They have to trust us with this role, the analytics, and also to make this a national project, because we are in fact defining what the amendment meant. And so that is very important. Also, the way we translated it, the fact that legal officers needed to trust us, that is very important. And not only trust us because we said so, but we asked legal experts, so we use them in the proper way. I think trust was very much important in the risk sharing part. So what you saw was, at first, the risk sharing part was not part of the agreement. It came to when two smaller universities said, well, we want to agree with pilot, but we need some sharing of risk. Then the first university said, well, okay, we want to share risk, but if 80% of the other universities are also joining, and then all the other universities joined, and now everybody is cooperating, so that is great. Of course, researchers need to have trust. They sign, they give us the right to share. They know they can be sued by, or they may be sued by publishers. So they have to trust that universities help them. And of course, universities have to report to the government about their work regarding 100% open access, and they add the work they do for Teeuwen in that report. So they have to trust the libraries that we are delivering what we say we're going to deliver. So I think that's my final slide. I hope you have some more knowledge about it, also maybe some inspiration. And if you want to know more, please contact me.
Well, thank you, dear Arjan. Many thanks. Maybe a small factual question by Lewis and Glada about the article, so we can deal with this. Doesn't need to wait for the Q&A, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, war is the article as it had appeared in the journal.
That's true. So the version of record, of course, there is some intellectual property right, but the value of that part is very small considered the value of the article itself. And the 6 months we gave to there's a 6 months exclusive period for the publisher still. So that's the combination of version of record, 6 months exclusive, and that is the way we translated it.
Well, thank you. Big applause for you, Arjan. Thank you very much. We hear now clearly how trust clearly appears to be a key element in implementing green open access, thanks to you sharing the good practice in the Netherlands from the pilot you launched and manage. You share, we take care. Oh, thank you. After hearing about copyright issues, securing ownership and data, and respecting integrity, let's explore another aspect of how we secure data and examine how providing access to online resource and respecting privacy can lead to issues about authentication and protection of privacy. So with Jos and Pieter, please join me. Let's see how can online library be considered as a trusted service. But before we start, while they are appearing on screen, let's stretch a bit and run a quick poll to warm up the audience maybe. So ladies and gentlemen, I will share a small poll with you. And you will tell me uh, if you know, it's a yes or no question. Do you know what Federated Identity Management means? So it should appear on the screen. You can answer and I will share the results so we have a slight idea. Okay, I can see people voting. And I will share when you vote a little more. About 100 people voted, so we are more than 200, so maybe I wait a little second more. Okay, that's all right. I will share the total and everything. You can see that. Okay, you can see it. Please tell me. Yes. So I run a second questions because there is almost 50-50. Second question, are you ready? Do you know what single sign-on means? We don't ask for definition, we just ask for a yes and no. So here I go and I run the poll. Oh, it goes very quick, so people are in front of their computer and they are widely sharing their knowledge. Okay, I wait some seconds more. Okay, now you can see 73% against 27, so there is a bigger gap here. So I'm going to close this poll and ask the third and last question. So that's the last chance for you to answer. Do you know what shibboleth means? No, you can play with the computer buttons. Oh, interesting. When we come to 100, I stop and I share. Okay, we are more than 100 people. So we can see that there is a part of yes or no that can be interesting. I will close this poll now. And Jos, Pieter, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Cecile, and thank you also, LIBER, for having us here. It's a pleasure for us to be here with a presentation. The first thing, I don't see the first slide. Oh, great, there it is. Now I can move forward. So here we are. What is FIM4L? Stands for Federated Identity Management for libraries. Libraries do need its own federated identity management. For one, managing digital access. Two, for protecting privacy of identities, to safeguard patrons on the digital landscape of information. FIM4L is a global initiative from librarians, national research networks, and other identity management specialists. In 2019, a LIBER working group has started. The goal is to have an accepted set of principles backed by libraries to establish federated single sign-on configurations between libraries and publishers worldwide, with special attention to privacy. If there is no open access and we have to use single sign-on, then we will have single sign-on as best as possible. In today's landscape of online scholarly information and the user as a central player, classical borders disappear. Online login activities could lead to exposure of personal information. And if you are not able to read your article without exposing your identity, it ultimately will break scholarly freedom. For instance, when you conduct sensitive research, you don't want to leave personal identifiable information behind. Many licensed resources are shared by the library. Patrons need to get authenticated to these resources in the most convenient way, anytime, at any place, with any device. And the resources, mostly served by platforms of publishers, are all around the world. The independent library guiding the patron has a crucial role in connecting this. The library, as a trusted intermediate, has to protect its patrons' privacy in order to provide convenient access for both students and researchers. The library must provide a safe way to access information. What we can expect is a shift towards federated single sign-on the coming years. Publishers tend to move away from IP-based access because of security reasons, on one side. On the other side, modern browsers are building in more restrictions in favor of users' privacy. There are even tools to hide your IP address, what will cause IP address-based access to fail. A soft driver of switching to IP from IP to single sign-on are the advantages of single sign-on for the library, like uniform login for on and off campus, and better handling of misconduct, and better statistics. So, Federated Identity Management. How it works. Federated Identity Management is a technical term for managing cross-border online access to publishers for your patrons. Federated Identity Management comes along with licensed e-resources. Sure, you should go for open access. But Federated Identity Management is still in place. Here you see a picture of how it works. You see the identity provider, it's the library. You see the service providers at the right side, the publishers normally, could be other ones too. The library serves normally hundreds of, as big you are, of course, but hundreds of publishers could be. And the service provider, like a publisher like Elsevier, that serves thousands of institutions. They work together through federations when it comes to identity management. So here you can see how it works in this picture. The library patron you see at the bottom, in the center, of course, first goes to the website of a publisher, in this case Wiley, and that happens anonymous. So Wiley doesn't know which person it is. Then the publisher asks the library. And the question then is from the publisher, is this user from your library? Then the library asks the user, please log in to make sure who you are. This is private information. So this is between the library and the library patron. They know each other. Then between the service providers and the identity provider are federations in place based on trust relationships with each other. So in the end, Wiley gives access to the library patron. And what happens with a login is also the provisioning of user data, attributes, as we call that. An IDP can provide additional attributes. These are exchanges at the first sign-on. And a publisher, a service provider, could also ask for additional information, such like an email address, if they want. But we advise a minimal disclosure policy as libraries, so that you can do your research anonymously. So now I will give the mic over to Pieter. We'll go ahead with the presentation and go more in depth. So
yes.
Here's the mic, Pieter.
Yeah, thank you, Jos. Yeah, so let's have a little more closer look about this process that Jos just showed to you. So the basis of federated identity management is a protocol called SAML, Security Assertion Markup Language, and that's the established SSO federated identity management protocol around right now. There's a follow-up protocol, OpenID Connect, which well functions quite similar. So basically, if you know how SAML works, you almost know how the new protocols OpenID Connect also work. So again, this is exactly the same slide as you have seen before. Now it's only about how the messages are sent. So again, you have the user that wants to request a resource, which is down here. I don't know if you can see my mouse, most probably you can't, but the resource is on the right side, this database thingy, and the user goes to the service provider, which is also the policy enforcement point, which means that the service provider decides whether the user gets access or not. And as you have heard right now, in this stage, the service provider doesn't know anything about the user, so it can't really decide whether to let him in or not. And that's why the service provider sends the user, well, first he will say, first he will send the user to a so-called discovery service, which is old-fashioned, also called the "Where are you from?" service, and that's exactly the reason for the service. It asks the user, where do you come from? Where's your home organization? And then the user can choose from a list, and this again is this trust framework of the Federation. Only trusted parties are members of this list, and there the user can find her own home institution and will then be redirected to the home institution. So now the user has contact to the identity provider, and in a private, highly secure fashion, the user types in name, username and password, or any other authentication processes. You can have multi-factor authentication and things like that. And then the identity provider can give answers to the service provider, so that policy enforcement point then can decide about letting the user in or not. And now that's where the XAML protocol comes into place. No, but all these redirects that happened already belong to this XAML profile. And so the identity provider can be seen as three different institutions. One is the authentication authority. This means this identity provider knows the real password of the user. It also has an attribute authority, which means the identity provider has information about this user. And it could also be an authorization authority, already telling the policy enforcement point what to do. But we can leave this out. This is very rarely implemented. So the user logs in, proves that it is the right user, and then the identity provider sends so-called assertions via the XAML protocol to the service provider. Just to be very sure. In your case, the service provider is the publisher, and the identity provider is either the library itself or the computer department of the university or so. And so now you have an authentication assertion. The service provider gets an authentication assertion just saying, the user you just sent to me for authentication was able to authenticate. So I can now establish this is the user of my constituency, of my library, of my university. And the user could successfully authenticate. And then the identity provider can also send attribute statements, attribute assertions, which could be, yes, this user that authenticated correctly is a student at our university, or is staff member, or so, things like that. So information about affiliation, which by itself is not privacy related. It's just a statement. The user with this IP address you have and the session you have is a student, nothing else. But attributes could also be email address, name, and things like that. And these are privacy related information. And so the FIM4L group is about giving recommendations, what kind of assertions, authentication assertion, and even more important, what kind of attribute assertions a library should give to a publisher. Yeah, so this is a wonderful technology, and it is around since quite some time, since, well, 10, 20 years, I should say. And still, the uptake in computer centers is quite high, and the national research networks did a lot to promote this technology. But in libraries, we still find a lot of reluctancy to adopt these technologies, well-established technologies. And of course, one of the concerns of libraries, and that's a good concern, and I share that a lot, is privacy concerns. How so the fear is that the library gives away too many personal data to the publisher, and the publisher can try to monetize those data. And so that is a real concern, and that's the reason why we founded Findable, to concretely address this concern. But of course, there are other arguments for not implementing XAML. One is never change the running system. I've got my VPN solution working, so everyone can do IP-based authentication, even if working from home. Or there's a easy proxy product that is used by a lot of libraries, and it works. And so we don't want to care. We just want to do our normal business. And of course, the fear is if you want to change a running system, that might cost money. Yeah, so, and the publishers, I must say, are quite aggressively promoting this new technology. And the libraries having, especially in the open access discourse, have, let's say, a different position than the publishers. There is not enough trust to the publishers to say, okay, we'll switch to that. You tell us which attributes you need, and we'll give it to you. So there's no real reference, no real guidelines how identity providers should configure their systems when talking to publishers. And if you want some more about this problem statement, just click on this link to our charter document. That's where we explain it in more detail. As I said, this technology is a very interesting technology. It works wonderful. It gives benefits like single sign-on. A user just needs to authenticate in the morning at one service, and if the user goes to another service, she would not need to do anything anymore because she's automatically authenticated, because the service provider talks to the identity. The second service provider talks to the identity provider without the knowledge of the user, and so the service provider knows, okay, this is an authenticated user. Publishers also, as I said, want to promote this technology, and there are several reasons for them to do so. For one, it's easier for making contracts. It's easier to follow, to have statistics, who's using our resources, and so on. And of course, and we don't have to forget this, publishers also see this as a chance to get more data. And as you all know, data is the oil of the 21st century. So everyone wants to have data, not only Google and people, but a lot of people just want to know more about their users. And so that's why we set up this Fim4L activity quite some time ago. And now, as you have learned, now we have even a LIBER working group with the same name. So there are two activities, one global activity and one concentrated activity in Europe under the board of LIBER, as a LIBER working group. Yeah, so the publishers have their own strategy to promote these technologies. It was called R21, and R21 now changed to seamlessaccess.org. and the main focus is to make this technology as easy usable as possible, and they developed some JavaScript stuff for the front end, where you just have a button access through your institution. This button you see here, the blue button on the right, and that's their way to promote this technology. And this button works quite nicely, and it can be used by different publishers, and it's just a button that initiates this whole process, which we showed you before, sending to the home organization and so on. And yes, so there was at one point of time, so FIM4L is actually maybe even older than R21, or if they are the same age, sort of. There was the idea, why don't you form one big group, so we can work together on this technology. And we definitely decided as FIM4L not to join seamless access as a whole and to dissolve in seamless access, because we see those two parties. We have the libraries on one side, we have the publishers on the other, and the communication between those two is sometimes good, sometimes not so good. These are two different entities with different interests, and that's why we thought it is very important to have a lobby for the libraries, and FIM4L sort of is a lobby for libraries in the frame of this XAML Federated Identity Management technology. So that's why we want to achieve a consensus on library policy for federated authentication that protects users' identities. So as libraries should and mostly are aware of privacy concerns, this is the major motivation for us also to do these recommendations, just to make sure that privacy of the users is okay. And this recommendations, this policy should help libraries and publishers, and needs to be clear for account managers, license managers, etc. Some people from the publisher world are working with us in the FIM4L working group, and vice versa. Some of the FIM4L people also work in seamless access. So there's enough discussion and communication between those two stakeholder groups. For us, we are our audience are library people, account managers, license managers that do the deals with the publishers, and within the contracts between libraries and publishers, also it is established what kind of attributes should be sent from the library to the publisher.
Pieter, we have to move on, Pieter. We have just.
I'll be quick now. To seek broader support for the policy amongst libraries and publishers, and to promote the use of uniform implementations. I'm sorry, I got to start. So we have this guidance document now ready. It had a public consulting period in March to May, and now we have the first public version with the title Federated Access to Online Resources, Principles and Recommendations for Library Services. And basically, these are our, in a nutshell, our recommendations. The three profiles, so to speak. One profile is be as anonymous as possible. Just send a traceable identifier, and if the same user goes to the publisher a second time, it will be a different identifier, so the publisher has no chance to do any personalization features which the users might want. So the second profile would be a persistent pseudonymous identifier that is generated for each service provider and is used on each return. So the service provider now knows, okay, it's the same person. The person wanted to have a yellow background in this web service, and then the user can see the yellow background and so on. And the third, so this means no privacy information goes from library to the publisher, even with this persistent pseudonym. And then additional non-identifiable information could also be sent, edu-person scoped affiliation, which tells this is faculty, this is student, and so on. We would also recommend that. These are our recommendations.
So,
sorry.
So I guess we have a showcase, but I can say that you can try it yourself on ProQuest and on Nature. Those two websites have implemented our seamless access and FIM4L principles.
Oh, thank you very much. I think we will share the slides with the showcases. They will be accessible online. Time is flying. I'm sorry we have to move, but the links were shared. Thank you very much. Big applause for you, because we just heard, thanks to you, about security issues between the users and its privacy, the library, the publishers, and how authentication gaps and challenges have to be dealt with. Thank you, Jos Westerbeke and Pieter Gietz, for displaying how trust and protection are pairing with reliability. Thank you. Okay, let's address now a third aspect of this topic. Let's see how repositories, liability, information sources, traceability are linked to fairness, openness, and transparency. We will make a focus on UK research libraries with Claire Knowles. Maybe we will have some issues with the camera, so we will see Claire. Hi. And you are from University of Leeds, United Kingdom, and William Nixon from Glasgow, United Kingdom. I hand over the microphone.
Hi, thank you very much, and thank you everybody for joining us today. We wish we could be with you in Belgrade. So unfortunately my network's not great. I've sent my kids aside, but I may disappear and you may just hear me at some point, or I may go pixelated. But William and I are going to talk about building trust in institutional repositories in the UK HE. And I'm Claire, and I'm from the University of Leeds, and I'll hand you to William, who'll say hi for himself.
And I'm William, I'm from the University of Glasgow, and I'm also disappointed to be in Belgrade, but delighted to have this opportunity to share some of our experience and our expertise here today working with Claire.
So this is the outline of our presentation, and we're going to talk a bit about why we're talking to you, and then some themes, and then going to ask you some questions at the end. So yeah, our background. So we're talking to you about repositories for more years than I think we care to remember, and in different institutions as well. We're in sort of other repository networks. So this is very much sort of building on our experiences working with our colleagues, both in our institutions, in these networks, and sort of things that I suppose we've learned from listening to others. But this isn't sort of we don't claim to have all the answers, and we may miss things out, but feel free to go and look at all these other things and links that we put in. So why have we chosen this topic? Well, this year is 20 years since there was an announcement about ePrints, and we both use ePrints. I've been at other institutions that use different repositories, but 20 years is a long time. I'm sure many of us in our repositories have items that have been there, sort of sat there with their metadata that's changed over time. It may be the same software. We may have moved it from one version to another, or one platform to another, different servers into the cloud locally, but it's been a change in time, and this is a sort of reflection on repositories and where they are now. We've seen a huge growth in the UK repositories since they sort of first came into being, very much supported sort of 10, 15 years ago by Gietz and the support they gave to sort of get institutional repositories up and running in the UK. You can see the growth. We have 252 institutional repositories, which is a massive number. I think that's institutions have many. And also the work that's sort of done elsewhere with open air, etc. Pass you to William now.
Thanks very much, Claire. So what we wanted to talk a little bit about this afternoon was some elements of sort of building trust, and we wanted to frame that in a number of kind of dimensions. So both Claire and I are fortunate to be part of the LIBER Emerging Leadership Program, and we've been exposed to such great pieces of work such as the trust equation and so on. But what we wanted to do was to think about a number of dimensions which could help us sort of frame trust within our repositories. And we looked at 4 of these. So these were platforms, policies, people, and processes. So platforms, again, different platforms are available. Have we gone open source? Have we gone commercial, hybrid, certification, which is now available and which is encouraged as part of LIBER's open science roadmap, looking at things like Core Seal Trust for data repositories. University of Edinburgh has that for their data share. The really transformational work around policies, both institutional, but at that intra-institutional level, particularly Plan S. The criticality of people, those relationships, both the library being able to provide the resources, the training, the support, and the tools to make our repositories living, breathing, trusted kind of key parts of our critical research infrastructure, but also some of that tools and so on around that. And then the processes, looking at all those workflows, the automation. I mean, at Glasgow as well, we've tried to make deposit and into our repository as frictionless as possible, as straightforward as possible for our academic colleagues, and looking at how we can kind of build on all of these sort of various elements. And dancing around that, we have kind of in that orbit, we have a number of kind of key themes we're going to posit some questions on. And I think, as Claire was kind of saying as well, this is really a think piece today for us in the time that we have available. But questions around discovery, about Plan S and open access, which are really critical and at the heart of what we are doing around our repositories, the tensions between CRIS's research information systems and repositories, our repositories about digital preservation, where do some of our other more specialist archives and special collections materials sit, and work done by bodies like the Federation of Open Access Repositories, CORE, on next generation repositories, where we are going next, building on not just the last 20 years, but really where we're actually going to go forward and be more innovative and more trusted. I'm going to hand back to Claire to give a little snapshot of Leeds.
Yeah, so at Leeds, we're slightly unusual in the UK in that we run 2 repositories for open access research content. So that's RO and RIO. It's a silent W. Through a partnership with York and Sheffield universities. This very much is a partnership. The staff are provided and work across the 3 institutions, and we develop them together and have roadmaps together. So we have those 2 repositories. We also have a number of Leeds-only repositories. So research data and our special collections digital libraries we do separately across those 3 institutions. At Leeds, we have a CRIS system. We use Digital Science Symplectic, which is connected to our ePrints. And that's what we use for the REF, which is the Research Excellence Framework, which in the UK is how we sort of return our outputs every 7-8 years to the government.
So the University of Glasgow is one of the older research universities in the UK. We were established in 1451. It took us about 550 years, however, to actually get to our first institutional repository, which was in 2001. And we have 3 core repositories for publications, theses, and research data. Unusually, both in Scotland and in the UK, we don't have a current research information system. Our repository itself is actually been made interoperable and interlinked with other university systems. So just touching on a couple of the themes that we really wanted to kind of explore in this afternoon's session. Discovery is a key part. Discovery is kind of in the DNA of our institutional repositories. You can see on this slide here, Google Scholar, the core, we have services like BASE. How can we further maximize the discovery of the content? Where does text and data mining fit into that wider ecosystem of sort of linked data? Looking at where we can integrate with our library management systems. The UK, we've been very successful in working with bodies like the British Library around the ethos service for theses. I think Claire would comment on this as well. Theses are incredibly popular. The downloads and the access for theses, when they're made open access, are incredibly popular, but also the power of aggregating all of this data. And I think this current pandemic, this current crisis, has really thrown open access and open science much more, it's really shone a light onto the importance of that interoperability, the standardized metadata, the transfer protocols and persistent URLs to continue to make our content discoverable. And I think looking forward, repositories are critical in the success and the delivery of Plan S and open access. When they had first come out, they were identified as a key role. There was a range of technical requirements. Bodies like Spark Europe have done some survey. We've also, institutions and bodies like Spark and COAR have fed into the review and the update of all of that, looking at where we can make repositories more straightforward for being able to access and make that content more readily available. And just this year, in kind of April, May, COAR had done some work with Coalition S and found that there were no large barriers for repositories being able to comply with and engage with open access. And I think that's really critical because that gives that credibility and that trust in the role that repositories can play in delivering Plan S. I'm going to hand over to Claire.
Digital preservation, obviously when you've had things for many years, how you preserve them, how you're keeping them for long term, and also how does the repository fit in with other preservation systems. So Glasgow is involved in this through the Gietz Open Research Hub, which has Archivematica as a partner. At Leeds, we're looking initially at our theses, and that's been sort of accelerated through this current COVID-19 situation where people can't go and print and then bind and hand in their versions. At Leeds, we've also been very fortunate that we've had 2 fellowships with the National Archives in the UK. One of those looking at metadata. What metadata should we keep? What do we put into digital preservation? They're focusing on the digital archives, but it comes into what we do with our theses as well and other objects. And metadata requirements for what's from the object, what's from the files, how it comes through, what about dates? How does that object sit in a preservation system or in those sort of multiple copies? Is it that the repository has your access copy, but your preservation copies are sat in different file formats, different locations to make sure that sort of worst comes to worst scenario, you can bring the whole self-describing object back. And this work sort of hacked and guided by the work of the Digital Preservation Coalition that we're members of, and as well, and helpful information with that. Another thing, if my button works, yeah, oops, sorry, that was a sneak peek. Is special collections. So having objects that are connected to the special collections, be those images, digitized content, born digital, audio and video. At Leeds, we have those in our repository, but they're much more complex objects, sort of as are research objects, which aren't PDFs, so research data, etc. So how are they described? And is it the same metadata standard to use? Can we move the repository beyond sort of being a store or with metadata and objects, but have them being annotated where people can interact with them? And that's where is the implementation of plugin, where you can go and zoom and then look at the annotation tools as well. And there's huge challenges with audio and video for a repository, which is very much a sort of click and download, to be able to play them, be able to interact with them, and more of a fuller experience for people when they come to a repository. William.
Thanks very much, Claire. So, oh, the slides have got very enthusiastic. So, just around the last couple of themes that we had, we wanted to raise the heretical question of Chris's and IR's. Clearly, I've come from an institution which doesn't have a current research information system, and I think there is some interesting tensions and relationships between a current research information system and an institutional repository, not least because of the range of platforms and the range of vendors. There's been a shifting landscape in recent years. The number of images on the right-hand side here should come with a disclaimer that other CRIS systems are available, whether it is pure symplectic add-ons for repository systems like DSpace, but they are also can create different roles and different relationships within the institution. They are usually bought by and managed by the research offices rather than the sort of the libraries. There then becomes questions around the integration of those with repositories. There have been some recent studies and some work showing some of the challenges around how well or how not well CRIS systems have been in terms of discovery. So the repositories have scored much, much better around that discovery, and going back to the heart of open access and open science, and being able to share, make more of our information, more of our research widely available. So they've become a really interesting kind of dimension in terms of that trust that we have with our colleagues. And I think the last one we wanted to sort of highlight was some of the work that the Confederation of Open Access Repositories have been doing, which is around the next generation repositories. So this is emerged out of a working group, a number of working groups from CORE, with a number of recommendations that were published in 2017. And I think a lot of that, one of the big shifts around that is about making the resource rather than the repository the focus of the service and the infrastructure. There's work ongoing there around the implementation of those technologies, but also starting to revisit work like the overlay peer review work, ways in which we can really try to be much more transformational around that existing scholarly communication infrastructure that we have. So I'd like to ask, could we run our poll, please, for our colleagues? Which of our themes do you think is most important for building trust? Okay, current research information systems aren't getting a lot of love. So all of these is very popular, followed by Discovery and Plan S. So that's actually very valuable, and I think kind of resonates with our own kind of senses around some of those elements. So kind of mindful of time, we just wanted to sort of revisit that in a section. I think it's important for us to kind of recognize the importance of repositories within the LIBER Open Science roadmap around that encouragement for developing infrastructures for repositories, the recommendations around certification. But I think as well, in these challenging times of the new normal, open access, repositories and trust have really come to the fore. So this includes transparency around research data, supporting studies on COVID-19, availability of peer-reviewed articles, but even anecdotally at my own institution, kind of researchers have commented about how broken the existing system is and how important open access is for being able to share and have access to kind of the research in particular around all of this. OpenAIR have built a COVID-19 gateway to try and harvest and pull together content around all of that. And I think that's a really exciting initiative around that. COAR have also put together recommendations for repositories, and there's some links to these that are in the chat link there. COAR have put some recommendations around how you can manage and map your metadata to increase the availability and making that possible. And also, looking at new technologies, looking at cloud-based repositories, but also the invest in open infrastructure. The importance of the community trying to take back some ownership and some of that development and work around all of this. So I think Invest in Open is a really exciting initiative for us. And I think it's one that helps to provide us both with trust, but also with credibility within the community. So I think that was really what we just wanted to say about both within the UK in building trust, but also very much thank you to colleagues for their attention. Thank you to Cecile for making those links available, but also thank you to our wider community, LIBER, Spark, COAR, IIIF, the Open Repositories Network, and so on. We're very fortunate to be in an exciting transformational community. So thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, William. Everyone, can you come and join the panel, because this is the Q&A session part starting. I can see that the audience is very positive. We started collecting some questions. Maybe as a starter, we have a question for Ariane, a general one. And please, attendees, consider giving your input into the chat box, because this is the perfect moment and techniques for doing this. Ariane, what do you consider the biggest challenge in implementing your national open access legislation in the Netherlands?
Yeah, well, I think at first sight you could say, well, the amendment was very vague, or there wasn't a real mandate or budget. But at the end, there's all things that you can overcome. I think that leadership and alignment of leadership, so everybody feels a sense of urgency and is also acting at the right moment to the right direction, that is the biggest challenge.
Any other presenter want to react about the biggest challenge in implementing national open access legislation, or anyone from the attendance? Please put your input in the chat. Okay, so we will shift to another question directed to Claire and William. What kind of standardized metadata do you use for your special collections? And yes, this is a broadly shared question, actually.
Yeah, so at Leeds we use EAD description for our archives, and they are catalogued within our Axial EMU archival system, and that's also where our sort of other special collections are, and then they link through to our repositories and library management system, which is Alma and Primo. And I'm going to share in the a link to the work that has been doing, our National Archives Fellowship, about sort of metadata and looking at how you describe born digital collections for digitalization.
Yeah, I think I would echo that. We also have the kind of EMU system as the back end for our archive and special collections. And one of the challenges is the sort of standards and interoperability soup which we have, because the system is actually infinitely extensible. So we've actually sort of ended up trying to bring together museum metadata, Dublin core metadata for kind of some of the library elements, and also EAD as well. So trying to do some crosswalks and some building across some of that. We created a portal recently for that, and for one of our particular collection across library and museums and archives. And one of the things that we found was, in order to really optimize some of the search and discovery, we created some separate indexes for that, because actually trying to search across all the different metadata schema for matching terms and that granularity was, the performance just wasn't good enough.
Oh, thank you.
And I think that's where sort of identifiers come in. You know, if you can standardize your identifiers across your system, or ORCIDs and others, it makes things a lot easier.
Now we are almost at the end of this session. For the 3 remaining minutes, we have 2 general questions to the whole panel. The first question is a one that you can't answer in 1 minute, but still, maybe we can have your insight. What balance, what do you think is the current balance, and is it right between, on one side, policies and people, and on the other side, platforms and processes?
No, that's a really interesting question, and probably quite a hard question as well. I suspect that it's probably about right, because we really the policies and the people, I think, are absolutely going in the right direction, and you actually don't want the platforms and the processes to sort of wag the dog in terms of that. You know, you want to be able to say, this is what we want to do, and the platforms and the processes need to then sort of flex and be able to do that. And I think that's why it's been so important having that kind of wider engagement with sort of, you know, for instance, with Plan S, and looking at some of those elements and going, well, what is it we actually want to achieve, and where can we strike that functional balance with the actual platforms and the processes in order to achieve what the policies and the people actually want to deliver.
Yeah. And I think they're all knobs where you turn on during your project. And I think in our project we looked at all. But for example, the policy of an opt-out versus opt-in is also driven by the fact that the workflow is demanding much. So you try to solve a problem in one area also by putting an effort in another area. So I think you also always have to balance that. Yeah.
Okay, so last question to the panel, and we will have a last one for everyone before shutting the session. Last question to the panel. How can we measure trust? Is that usage, or do you have any other leads? Major issues. Yes, Pieter.
Just short, this is a very nice question actually, and there are different levels you can answer that. To make it very short, You can measure trust on the technological sphere by evaluating hash algorithms and how secure are they, and do we need new algorithms for better computers that can break in passwords and things like that. So they are very easy to measure. It's about, well, how many years does it take a supercomputer to crash to crash a password or something like that? But trust must also be measured on a process level. So all processes have to be in line with the policy, and have to, and that's the third level. They have also they have to be understood by the people living these processes. It doesn't make you don't have any trust if there are people involved that give away their credentials to everyone because they think it doesn't matter. So these are the three levels where you can measure trust, in my opinion.
Okay, so maybe this will be our final word. We have one question that we won't answer, but I would like to ask it to the whole audience, so we leave this session with more questions than answer, which is good sometimes. Are there opportunities to increase the links between English, Dutch repositories, French repositories, any European repositories, but also maybe about trust leverage and way of achieving trust? So in libraries we trust. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank
And
you.
enjoy
Thank
the
you.
conference.
And thank you, LIBER.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.